Welcome to this edition of the Business Video Executive Briefing Series on TMCnet. I'm your host, Steve Vonder Haar. This time we visit with Fabian Gordon, Chief Technology Officer of Ignite Technologies, who tells us a little bit about how Ignite's peer-to-peer technologies can play a role in enhancing business video communications.
One of the things that we focus on at Ignite is the enterprise space. That's a particularly challenging space. Not that consumer is not challenging, because it does pose its own set of issues, but the enterprise space is a little bit more challenging in that the regulation by the network administrators, the security guys, the desktop management guys, it makes it very difficult for P2P to exist in that environment. What we bring to the table, once we get past all those security issues and really show those guys how we built this stuff, is we allow them to then understand and predict how their network's going to behave when we do these mass movements of literally petabytes of data for some customers on a yearly basis. Their network today can't handle that using the traditional unicast type deliveries. Peer-to-peer allows them to leverage lots of extra bandwidth and extra computing resources that are just sitting there on the network not doing anything. Well, if you think about your typical enterprise, you'll typically have clusters of users, either 10 people in a bank branch somewhere or several thousand people at a home office. And larger companies in particular will have multiple sites. You're not going to put your whole company in one place. In that scenario, you have the ability to leverage the fact that there are literally 95 or more % of the bandwidth available to any given user who's plugged into a given switch goes unused. Right? So if I need to deliver content, what the network administrators have grown accustomed to and are very comfortable with is the idea of hardware caching devices and putting things on specific points of aggregation on the network where traffic tends to bottle up, and I can maybe reuse the fact that I delivered something to one person through this hardware device or caching proxy server or whatever it is, and provide that content to someone else without incurring the cost of obtaining it. Well, really the peer-to-peer logic is no different. We fully embrace the concept of localized caching. We just feel that everyone who receives a package or a video or whatever it is that's distributed, because we don't care, should be able to benefit someone else who wants that same particular package or video. So really, if you think about it, the user's plugged into a 100 megabit or even a gigabit connection is using less than 1% of that at any given time. And from a CPU perspective, he's probably 95% unutilized. Our goal here is to really leverage those assets that companies are already paid for, they're already implemented, they're already in place. Let's leverage those so that users can help each other, even though they may not realize they're doing it, and leverage those unused resources instead of having to provision more and more and more bandwidth. Because regardless of how much you provision, it's never going to be enough. Well, software as a service has been very key to Ignite throughout its existence. We've always operated the system ourselves, and I think that has several obvious benefits and several that are maybe not so obvious. The more obvious benefits, I think, are the fact that you have the trained professionals running the ship, right? We run it for our customers when there are issues or monitoring implementations that go out of spec or maybe too high. We have guys trained that know how to look at those things and understand, hey, I need to rebalance something here, or I need to increase resources there, or allocate more space to something, whatever it is. Putting all that software inside an enterprise means that an IT department now has to learn yet another application, another set of servers to maintain, and all that. And if you really think about it, particularly in the larger enterprises, there's a high degree of mobility in these users. Lots of our customers are very worried about when the weather goes bad and users have to work from home. They'll VPN in or whatever. Operating as a software allows us to absorb those type of changes in the distribution demographic and, of course, the bandwidth required to provide content to those users. Because if they go off the network, they may no longer be able to peer with someone who's inside the corporate network. They could peer outside the corporate network, with other peers. They could peer with us, and the business would not have to worry about absorbing the additional bandwidth to deliver that content to users. And also, again, from an operational standpoint, all the customer really needs to know is, how do I log into the administration site, and how do I use the software? Not how do I run the servers, how do I configure all this other stuff? Really, the enterprise customer self-focused is on getting the client distributed out. That becomes a part of their desktop configuration or their laptop configuration, whatever it is, and that's all they really need to understand. Traditionally, the distribution means for video or large content has been physical media, either printed binders or DVDs or something electronic that can be dropped in the mailbox and sent to users. In that scenario, you really had no way of knowing who watched the content, how secure is it, what happened to that material after the user saw it, did it get distributed to a competitor or someone who shouldn't see it, that kind of stuff. And so you really didn't know. You kind of a very billboard type approach. Let's spray it out there and hope people come by. Right. What Ignite does, because we know who we've targeted the content to, and the target could be specific, it could be driven by what I know about the individual, some viewing habits, something about his computer, where he is in the Active Directory, or any of those kind of things. I know who I sent this content to. I know transactionally that they started the delivery. I know they completed the delivery. I know, because we get transactions back, how many times the user watched the content, when he watched the content. In the case of video, for example, I can tell you how much of it he or she watched. And I get all that information back. So from a publisher standpoint, you can go back into our system and generate reports on that. Show me a list of everyone who watched this particular video more than 50% or more than 80%. And for those people, then take action on the results of that query. So I can say, for anyone who's watched chapter 1 of this 5-chapter series, automatically send them chapter 2. And the system just does that automatically once those rules have been defined. Reporting is a huge aspect of an enterprise delivery system, knowing who watched the content and what I can do with that information downstream. I think that's a generational thing. If you go old school, where all communications were top down and very little communications came from the bottom up, that's fundamentally changed with the newer generation of management and CEOs and then users who frankly have now been very successful at taking consumer type devices and consumer type interactions and bringing them into the enterprise. I think the enterprise can't really hold back on those anymore. And why would you? The past has always been about getting my message out, not your message. And I think the current, and probably more so in the future, has been about really listening to what everybody has to say and filtering out what's valuable and what's not. That filtering can be done a number of different ways, but the mechanisms for providing the transport capabilities for that type of messaging is really what we're about here. So allowing the user to create content, submit it, publish it, whatever it is, that's a very good thing. It allows people to convey their thoughts, their messages, their ideas, and hopefully as a company, you're embracing those kinds of positions, right? You want to hear what people have to say. I don't want to pay 100 people for a salary and only get 10% of their input on things, right? So, and then really the science there is not so much the delivery and how do I get it into the system, because we've already built those things. A lot of the technology that I think is going to be coming is how do I filter that stuff? How do I review that stuff? How do I determine what's appropriate? Is it post or pre-publication or both? Those kind of things. And how do I deal with people rating content, which is something, you know, we have those capabilities today where people can submit messages during a live or questions during a live presentation or things like that. It's really not rocket science to add asynchronous messaging or rating systems to pre-delivered content. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's going to be very exciting in the next 10, 15 years, particularly to see this fully develop to where people are really, do I even need to be at the office to do my job anymore? It'll be good.
That's all the time we have for this edition of the Business Video Executive Briefing Series on TMCnet. Our thanks goes out to Fabian Gordon of Ignite Technologies for sharing his thoughts with us today. Be sure to join us next time for another edition of the Business Video Executive Briefing Series for more discussion with thought leaders in the business video sector. I'm Steve Vonder Haar. Thanks for your time.